Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. The government is considering steps to allow a smoother exit for weaker telecom providers at a broader policy level as part of revised mergers and acquisition rules. The Ministry of Telecommunications has said that the solutions for aiding the sector would have to be done on a policy level with the view to keep the sector alive. The decision was made a day after the proposed merger between Reliance Communications and Aircel fell through due to legal and regulatory uncertainties. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the possible exit plan for suffering telcos. Joining me on the program today are Ravi, Visvesvaraya, Sharada, Prasad, independent telecom consultant; Rajan S. Mathews, Director General, Cellular Operators Association of India; Yatish, Rajawat, Senior Journalist; and Gulveen, Aulakh, Special Correspondent, The Economic Times. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ravi, Prasad, I'd like to begin with you. What's happening to the telecom sector?
Well, you're going to see a consolidation always, because there's no country in the world that has had so many telecom operators, where in each circle in India you have at least half a dozen, if not more, telecom operators. And typically the industry all over the world is that you will have three players really, and a host of also RANs if they're there. But typically all over the world you have three dominant operators, two of which roughly will have about a 40% market share and another will have about 20. So this is a natural sequence of events that will be there, that the weak get swallowed by the strong. And if the weaker operators are not able to sustain themselves, then certainly mergers and acquisitions should be allowed, and it should be allowed as a business case, rather than trying to artificially prop up operators. You should leave it to business forces and market forces.
Sure. Rajan, Mathews, a booming sector, a booming industry seems to be in the doldrums at this point in time. Well, I wouldn't write the obituary just as yet, but certainly corrective measures are required.
So absolutely. I think one of the things that we've witnessed is this double whammy on the industry, where first you made the cost of the inputs so expensive vis-a-vis spectrum and the cost of operations, and then you had the double whammy of continuing to extract the revenue up front in terms of the spectrum charges, and then continuing the revenue share model. And it was usually one or the other, but now you've got both. And then you had a new entrant coming in that really took the top line off. So now you have a diminution of the top line and your cost structure continuing to suffer from this double whammy. So obviously the bottom line is going to be impacted, and that's precisely what we are seeing. About 30% of every rupee goes back to the government. And that's why we, as the operators of the industry, are knocking at the government's door, because the government gets the bulk of this revenue stream that's caused part of the problem for the industry.
Okay, fair enough. Yatish, Rajawat, is the demand, justified at this point in time? They are demanding for some kind of a stimulus from the government. Should the government give the telecom operators a stimulus?
So there are three things here, Frank. One is that this situation that has developed is not developed because of entrant of a new competitor only. It's been evolving over a period of time. Most of these companies are very highly indebted. They have borrowed money to pay for spectrum, which was a business decision at one point in time. They have gone and invested in infrastructure. They have acquired companies in infrastructure, which they have, which does not happen anywhere else in the world. They have not invested in the network per se. So they've not upgraded the technology. So a new entrant comes in with a new technology, he's wiped them out. So there is industry woes, and the industry is certainly in pain. Now, what should the government do? The government can do three things, and out of one of those things Rajan pointed out, which is the spectrum fees, which is there could be some waiver or adjustment there. But more important than that, in this particular case, particularly this merger, is the issue of how do you deal with the debt. You see, this merger did not go through primarily because the banks do not agree to this merger. They did not agree to the fact that a merged entity would result in a larger write-off, which will finally wipe out, 47,000 crores and 25,000 crores. It will finally be wiped out the balance sheets of the banks. So the government has to take a call there. And the call there is what? they have to ask these companies to divest their unrelated investment, including any property, real estate, infrastructure, before going in for a debt restructuring. They have to, these companies have to agree to the fact that they are willing to swap this debt for equity, which they have been shying away from now. So the government has to trigger that process, and these companies has to accept that process before any kind of so-called package can be developed, delivered, and executed for the sector. Does it need to be done? Immediately, yes. But the companies have to agree to certain things on their side too. It cannot be a one-sided government coming out and bailing out a sector because of certain business decisions and certain changes in the environment. Then if it does it in that way, there will be huge uproar against that. Because why are you doing it for one sector? There are other sectors which are suffering too. Textile sector is going through its own problems and much bigger problems. It is a much larger employment. The garment industry is going through a major crisis of its own. So the industry has to step up on the plate, come up with a solution, and then the government can work out the, and it has to then apply to all the players in the industry, not just the players who are doing badly. It will apply to all the players.
So the bottom line being a workable solution at the end of the day. Yes, okay, fair enough. Gulveen, Aulakh, an exit plan is something that the government is probably looking at. What kind of an exit plan does the telecom sector really require?
Well, as Rajan and Yatish, both of them pointed out, there are a number of steps that the government can possibly take. But the ground situation is what the telcos will have to convey to the government. They, after all, are the leaders. They know what is required and when. I believe it completely depends on what kind of communication that the telcos are able to present to the government, present their case, which is where all do they need help, in what way. They have done previously in the interministerial group, there have been a number of meetings, but it appears now that the government wants to consider more solutions at a policy level. So those, what more can be done is what the telcos will have to do to them much more effectively.
Sure. You know, Ravi, Prasad, what are the biggest challenges facing the telecom sector at this point in time, and how can we address some of those challenges?
Well, the challenges facing the telecom sector are a complete revolutionary change in technology, plus the entrance of this new operator who's changed the rules of the game. And now we are at a technology cusp, a crisis point, where really you're moving away from voice, which is a commodity, to data, and you're coming in with new services which can greatly expand the market, which are economies of scope, and not really economies of scale because the market is saturated in terms of voice, but economies of scope in terms of content, in terms of all kinds of data services, in terms of infotainment, entertainment, education. The data revolution and the broadband revolution will have enormous revenue, can generate enormous revenue streams, but the infrastructure, the broadband infrastructure for that has to be built. For that, you need, as Rajan and Mathews pointed out, a lot of the spectrum charges need to be brought down. Secondly, we have to see that how much of this is the fault of the operators' business decisions, and how much of it is the fault of the government policies, and how much is it the fault of the banks for recklessly lending without, without being strict about the lending. You have a precedent in 1988, 1999, when the Vajpayee government bailed out the telecom operators, and for the fault of the telecom operators who had bid these astronomical sums in 1995, and it was their fault that they bid it, and the government was well within its rights to recover the license fees from the operators, but that's not a pragmatic decision. The Vajpayee government took a very pragmatic decision that this sector is too critical to fail, to be allowed to fail, and it has to be bailed out. And the operators were bailed out, and then that led to an absolute boom in the sector. The crises facing the sector are really the fall in the average revenue per user. But you have to make that up by offering whole kinds of new services, infotainment. You'll start getting your money from things like content, all kinds of revenue streams, educational policies, telemedicine, telehealth, offering all kinds of other services to help the consumer. A lot of these services that the telecom operators will tie up with third parties, value-added services, and the value-added services people and other kinds of businesses that are online digital businesses can share with the telecom operators, so that can be a revenue stream for them.
Okay, so fair. Yeah.
The play is that what is the government bailing out? Is the government bailing out wrong business decisions, or is it bailing out a sector which, because of government decision, has come to a crossroads?
Now, who's going to make that decision?
So that is the crucial point. And because, see, the government is not in the business of bailing out sectors. That's not the job of the government. Especially if they make wrong business decisions. I mean, you know, if you're doing a business, you have a risk appetite, and you went out and bid, you know, enormous sum for a spectrum that you should not have bid for. You borrowed money from the banks. So do you blame the banks, or do you blame the companies which bid for this at high? There was this mad rush, euphoria of sorts that, you know, the spectrum is going to go out of existence and we need to grab as much as possible. So therefore, the amounts went very high. And as Ravi pointed out, there was the same situation happened earlier also, where the government changed the parameters from one-time payment to revenue share and all that. But now, you see, there are number of players in each of those sectors. If the government comes out with a policy saying that the number of players in each of circles has to be reduced, will the banks agree to it? Government cannot force the banks by a fiat that here, this is what you have to do to write off your debt, because we are asking a consolidation of the sector. The government cannot trigger off a consolidation in the sector. What the government can do is ease the process of those mergers and acquisitions, you know, ease it in terms of giving clearances. Now, that is a procedural issue. That will not change the dynamics of the sector. You know, if you combine two bad telco operators together, you think two bad or two loss-making telco operators combined together will give you a profitable telco operator?
Two minuses will not make a plus in reality.
Precisely. So that is a misconception to say that, you know, if these 3 or 4 people are combined together and all of them are making losses, and they will suddenly become profitable. The profitability will come only when the debt is restructured, because that is the overhang.
So that's the key issue that needs to be addressed, is what you're suggesting. Yes, Rajan.
So right, just some sort of corrections. Where and how did we get to where we did? So please remember that the government determined technology till 2014. So when they gave you spectrum, they said it must be compliant with GSMA standards. All right. So then in 2014, they came up with this notion that you will have to rebid for your spectrum that you already were given. All right. And then you say astronomical prices. Of course, you constrain the supply. What do you expect? That's 101 economics. That's precisely what happened. You constrained the supply. You said, we've only got this much. Now, you've got to get your business back. People were not asking for new spectrum. They were bidding back for existing spectrum, which the government all of us said, oh, we're going to give you, quote unquote, liberalized spectrum. In our mind, that was a bit of a sort of a new theme. And so when you have these types of dynamics coming in, and then the Supreme Court coming in and saying, henceforth, it's only by auction. Of course, we support that. But then the context...
One at a time, please. Yeah. Let him complete and then you can respond.
And then the context was those. Limited supply, all right? And then a bidding war starts, you know, on an airplane, one parachute, all right? What's the highest bid you're going to make if you're going down, right?
Okay.
What do you expect?
Okay, point taken. Yes, Yatish.
So the dynamics were changed, but the dynamics were corrected. They were corrected in favor of the government, in the same sense that the government realized that they were losing revenues. And they said that spectrum which was earlier taken for free now needs to be bid for. And that was fair, because it is a national resource in that sense. And as you know that after the coal scam and all, national resources bidding and auction became a norm. And telcos were not, you know, fair brothers or fair, you know, babes in the woods who didn't know what they were doing before. They knew it, and they captured spectrum. But the first part of it is, and this you have to realize, that for the last 7 years or so, they were in a demand fulfillment mode. Okay, they were in a demand fulfillment mode. Most of these companies did not have a sales department. They have a distribution department, in the sense that they would go and distribute the SIM cards. They would not go and sell services. Now, to sell services, you need to encapsulate and build services around them. You cannot know, like Ravi said, Voice is commoditized. You saw it coming for the last 7 years. You didn't prepare for it. You didn't invest in the infrastructure. You didn't even build new towers. In other words, you were actually trying to monetize the infrastructure when nowhere in the world telcos own infrastructure. The towers are always owned by third party. They are a real estate business. It's not a services business.
India started that, by the way.
No, but that's
no,
not
one at a
you
time,
built
please,
a business model which is incorrect. Your capital investment went into, and now those very companies have become they sucked in revenues from where? From the parent companies, from the promoters. And the main company, which is supposed to be a driver of the business, went down.
Okay, fair enough. Let's take the discussion forward. Gulveen, is this a sector that is waiting to crash? Is this a sector that's going to go downwards going forward?
I don't think that's a comment that I would like to make, considering that we have stalwarts sitting here. But I believe Rajan can take that answer better. From what we understand, from what we see as reporters into the sector, there is, of course, a lot of competition, and it has been hyper competition for quite some time. But going downwards, well, I think Rajan would be a better person.
Okay,
to
fair enough. So let me just, I think, first of all, to say these statements, the industry came up with outsourcing. The rest of the world looks to us in terms of the outsource model, all right? So we've done that. So it isn't as if we sat on this type of asset base. We've done that. How do you explain the fact that you pay 130% for every megahertz of spectrum vis-a-vis global standards? We pay for our equipment global prices. My ARPU, $3. International ARPUs, $75. And if you look at the trend of the ARPUs and the affordability to the customer, please tell me which other part of the world has this type of affordability in terms of voice.
Fair enough.
All right? And when you say till 2014, it was a 2G network specified by the government. To say that we didn't bring in new technologies is not correct. We, after all, bid for 3G. We, after all, bid for 4G. And we then started rolling out 3G and 4G networks. To say that that was something that sort of just fell out of the sky is inaccurate and inappropriate.
Okay, okay. I know you're itching to come in on the debate and have your say. I'm going to come back to you. Let me get in the others too. Ravi, Prasad,
yes.
Is the consumer then going to be the ultimate sufferer, because the telecom operators now, in all probability, are going to increase the tariffs, but with a new player, they weren't able to do that in the past, but some kind of consolidation may take place as far as prices are concerned?
Well, I think in the short term, the prices will rise for the short term, but they cannot sustain that for too long, because with mobile number portability, the consumer will walk. And secondly, you're seeing this big shift in the next 2-3 years from circuit switched voice of 2G, you're starting to get 4G and 5G, where voice will become virtually free or will be given away free, and the operators will make their money from value-added services. So the operators will start getting to deals with content providers, with let's say providers of value-added services, with let's say businesses who use their subscriber base, advertising. See, a lot of the monetization of the subscriber base for all kinds of services which are even not thought of today. So let's say somebody runs a business, an online business, where say he's wanting to reach out to your subscribers and wants maybe sell his goods and services to your subscribers, and the operators can get a share of that business. So I see in the long term, let's say another 2 or 3 years, operators might be giving away voice services for free and making their money from these value-added services for which consumers will be willing to pay.
Okay, these value-added services, however, will require some kind of money, some kind of infrastructure as well. Is the sector, or is the health of the sector as it stands right now in a position to bring in this new technology and bring about this change?
I think the focus of the industry very clearly is to continue to invest in 4G networks, get ready for 5G. These are the sort of focus of the industry. Obviously require significant amounts of investments to be able to move there. Spectrum needs will continue to require. Because one of the things that we notice is that every time you create a better highway, the demand increases. You're going from, a couple of gigabits, to 10, 15, 20, and the more and better the experience, the more is the demand. So I'm saying this sector is always going to be challenged, and it's a global phenomenon. You're always going to be challenged, and that's why consolidation has always been the sort of dynamic in both international and now here in domestic markets as well. And you're basically saying, look, the day of dumb pipes is over, right? You'll see in America, AT&T acquiring, cable networks, and Verizon going and getting content providers and all of this. So I think the dynamics are going to change dramatically when you move to an all data network, not a question.
Is that what's going to happen here in India as well? And is that good for the telecom sector on a whole? Just 2 or 3 major players?
Absolutely. I think if you look internationally, that's all you really require. And if you look at the academic literature, they say that you don't need any more than 4 players or so to actually determine good competitive practice and dynamics in the marketplace. I think we're there.
Okay, fair enough. Yatish, as far as the government is concerned, do you believe that the government has made enough money out of spectrum? The industry is suffering at the moment. Is there enough elbow room maybe to nudge them here and there?
So, see, the spectrum fees is, it's a receivable of sorts, so, which is something that the government can control and can reduce, increase, change the terms of it as it wants. But we are sitting in a year that the economy is also requiring a stimulus, and there is a talk about GST rates being reduced downwards. So the revenue receipts are expected to come down further if we bring down the GST rate itself from the high of 28% to 14%. So there is that larger macro dynamics in place, and there are certain sectors, including telecom, which is saying that we want to have a moratorium of sorts on our spectrum payment. But the moratorium on the spectrum, or any leverage or any benefit given in the spectrum, will not reduce the pain of the sector, because the pain of the sector is not just the spectrum fees. The pain of the sector is the overhang of the debt. Every company in this sector can no longer borrow from any other bank here or abroad. They can't even raise money bonds because they are not considered debt-worthy companies. So that is a fundamental shift which the companies have to restructure first. They have to hive off. They have to take away businesses that do not make sense to them. They have to stop. They have to restructure, go into SDR. Both Arcom and Aircel have a SDR process on. So they have to go through that process.
Sure.
So what can the government do there? The government can ease that process a little bit, saying that, okay, fine. But finally, these companies have to agree that we will exchange our debt for equity. They have to agree to those. Okay. Then the haircuts will be given on the debt.
Okay, fair enough. I've got about 2 minutes left on the program, so I'm going to get closing comments from all my guests, starting with you, Gulveen, Aulakh. What's the way forward, really?
Well, the way forward is very clear. Telcos need to sit with the government. They need to tell that these are the problems and these are the, say, XYZ are the solutions that we think can work for the sector. I'm sure there would be a lot of to and fro, but it'll be best to see what solution can both the parties arrive at. Okay. Sure. Knowing the ground realities.
Sure. Ravi, Prasad, your concluding remarks.
Well, I think the government really should look at the future of the telecom sector till 2025 or 2030 and work out a long-term plan. In terms of this, I think the technologies that will survive will be 5G and 4G, because you require 5G and 4G for smart cities. Sure. 3G is really very much at a dead end. 2G will always be there, first for the Internet of Things, machine-to-machine communications, which require 2G. All your point-of-sales terminals are 2G. The government should actually move voice out of 2G and reserve 2G only for machine-to-machine communications, Internet of Things, because India is going to be huge for Internet of Things. Okay. 3G is really a dead end, and maybe the government should give incentives to subscribers to move from 3G to 4G and 5G, because everything that 3G can do, 4G and 5G can do better, both in terms of handsets as well as in terms of the infrastructure, the infrastructure equipment required.
Right. Rajan, Mathews, your closing.
So I think there's got to be a fundamental shift in the perspective of government of seeing this industry as a milk cow that you continue to milk for revenue ad nauseum. You've got to go to a different paradigm which says this industry needs to be nurtured, it needs to be developed, it needs to be sustained, and those are the principal areas that we need to look at because of the cascading impact this industry has on GDP. Everybody knows this fact that's put out there. 10% penetration in broadband, 3 and 4% increase in GDP.
Right.
Those facts should drive the policy making of the government.
Yatish, close the show for us.
3 things. Telecom infrastructure should be taken out from the hands of the operators. They should divest it. Banks should look at a easier and a faster way of restructuring the debt. Third, the spectrum fees have to be restructured. The payment of that has to be restructured without causing too much of a burden on the government.
Okay. Right. All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to Ravi, Visvesvaraya, Sharada, Prasad, Rajan S. Mathews, Yatish, Rajawat and Gulveen, Aulakh. That's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for watching. See you again next time.
Thank you.